"You ungrateful bastard!" I screamed at Dan, my voice dripping with venom. "How could you do this to me after everything I've sacrificed for this family?" Dan stood there, his face devoid of any remorse, clutching that cheap blonde bimbo's hand. "I'm sorry, Sam, but I've fallen out of love with you. Amber understands me in a way you never could." I wanted to claw that smug look right off his face. "Understands you? She's half your age and just using you for your money, you idiot!" Amber batted her fake eyelashes. "That's not true, Danny. I love you for who you are." She shot me a vindictive glare. "Unlike your bitter, workaholic wife. The audacity of that gold-digging whore. I'd worked myself to the bone at that soulless corporate job to give Dan and our son Caleb a comfortable life. And this was how they repaid me? I can't believe you're taking her side, Caleb." I turned to my son, desperate for an ally, but he just shrugged, his eyes glazed over like he couldn't care less about my anguish. Dan stepped forward, his voice smug. "It's over, Samantha. I want a divorce. I'm leaving you for Amber." Those words felt like a punch to the gut. After 25 years of marriage, he was just discarding me? Traded in for a younger model, like some rusty old car? White-hot rage boiled inside me. They wanted to play dirty? Fine, I'd make them regret the day they ever crossed Samantha Henderson. Squaring my shoulders, I met Dan's cold stare. "You're going to wish you never betrayed me. I'll make sure you and your little tramp end up with nothing." I stared blankly at my computer screen, the numbers and figures blurring together as my mind drifted back to that awful night. Dan's callous words echoed endlessly, each replay feeling like a fresh wound. "I'm leaving you for Amber." How could the man I devoted half my life to throw it all away for some cheap fling? We'd built this life together, the house, the savings, raising Caleb, and he just discarded it, discarded me. The shrill ring of my office phone mercifully pulled me back to reality. "Henderson Accounting, this is Sam." "Miss Henderson, your 3 o'clock is here to see you," my assistant's voice crackled through the line. "Send them in, Janice." The door opened and a sharply dressed woman around my age stepped inside. She extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Samantha? Hi, I'm Diane Locke, your attorney." I shook her hand, giving her a weary smile. "Thanks for coming in on such short notice." Diane waved a dismissive hand as she took a seat across from me. "Not a problem at all. Now, why don't you walk me through what's been happening?" I recounted the whole sordid affair. Dan's betrayal, my deadbeat son's surprising lack of loyalty, Amber's transparent gold digging. As the words tumbled out, I could feel the anger building again, burning away the numbness. When I finally finished, Diane let out a heavy sigh and leaned forward. "I'm so sorry you're going through this, Sam. Your husband is clearly in the wrong here. But I want you to know, we're going to fight this, and we're going to win." Her confidence was reassuring, fanning the flames of my own determination. "Damn right we are," I stated firmly. "That bastard and his whore want to play in the mud? They're going to regret ever crossing me." A slight smirk played across Diane's lips. "That's just what I like to hear. So where should we start?" I thought for a moment, then narrowed my eyes. "I want you to go over our finances with a fine-tooth comb. Every bank account, investment, asset. I need to know exactly what we're working with." Diane nodded slowly. "Consider it done. Anything else?" Meeting her gaze, I felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction. "Yeah, dig up every single shred of dirt you can find on Dan and his little mistress. Affair is just the tip of the iceberg, I'm sure." This time, Diane's smirk stretched into a full-blown grin. "Now you're speaking my language, Sam." As she began pulling out her laptop, I leaned back in my chair, a hard smile spreading across my own face. They had no idea what kind of hell they'd unleashed, but they were about to find out. I gripped the phone tightly, my knuckles turning white as I listened to the recording again. The unmistakable sounds of rustling sheets and breathy whispers filled my ear. "Oh, Dan, you feel so good inside me," a woman's sultry voice purred. I felt bile rise in my throat as Dan's husky chuckle responded. "You like that, baby? You're so tight." The lewd audio faded into a chorus of moans and the squeaking of a bed frame. I'd heard more than enough. Shaking with rage, I slammed the phone down and shot a venomous glare at Diane. "Well, you were right. There's no mistaking those voices. It's him and that little whore." My attorney's face was grim as she slowly nodded. "I'm so sorry, Sam, but this recording is rock-solid evidence of his affair." His disgusting, cheap affair with his 20-something secretary. I spat, fury coursing through my veins, while I was at the office busting my ass to pay our bills. Diane placed a calming hand on my arm. Just breathe, okay? We've got him dead to rights on this. It'll be a huge asset when we take him to court. Court? I laughed bitterly. Oh, I'm going to destroy him well before this ever sees a courtroom. What do you mean? Snatching up the phone again, I rapidly punched in a number I knew by heart, Dan's office line at Hendricks & Co. After a few rings, his assistant picked up. Hendricks & Co. Accounting, this is Gail speaking. Putting on my best sickly sweet voice, I purred, Why, hello, Gail. This is Mrs. Henderson calling for my husband. Oh, hello, Mrs. Henderson. One moment, please. The line clicked over to hold as I turned to Diane with a wicked grin. Watch and learn. A few seconds later, Dan's confused voice came on the line. Sam? What's going on? Everything okay? Everything's just peachy, Danny, I cooed in a sugary tone. Although, I did have one little question for you. Okay. What's up? Pausing for maximum impact, I stated calmly. Does your secretary Amber usually join you for nooners in our marital bed? Because that's certainly what it sounds like on this charming little recording I have. Dead silence fell over the line as I let those words sink in. Finally, Dan sputtered. Sam, I can explain. Save it, you pathetic, cheating bastard, I roared, any hint of sweetness vanishing. I hope you and your cheap whore were worth throwing away 25 years of marriage. Not waiting for a response, I slammed the phone down again, chest heaving. Diane was staring at me with a mixture of shock and admiration. Well, she said slowly, I'd say that's one way to get things moving. A savage grin spread across my face as I reveled in the sweet taste of revenge. The front door slammed open, and Dan stormed inside, his face beet red. What the hell was that stunt you pulled at my office? I calmly looked up from the kitchen table where I was reviewing some files. Stunt? I was simply asking my husband an innocent question. Innocent? He let out a mirthless laugh. You ambushed me and broadcasted our private life to my entire office staff. Shrugging, I replied coolly, Well, I had to find out the truth about your extracurricular activities somehow, since you clearly weren't going to be honest with me. Dan opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut him off. Hey, what's with all the yelling? We both turned to see Amber sauntering down the hallway, wearing one of my silk robes that clung obscenely to her curvaceous frame. She made a big show of draping herself all over Dan. Oh, hey, babe, she purred, smirking at me. I thought I heard some angry voices out here. White-hot rage lanced through me at the sight of this cheap hussy so brazenly making herself at home in my house. Get your skanky paws off my husband, you little tramp! Amber just sneered. Ex-husband, I think you mean? Right, Danny? To my horror, Dan simply nodded in agreement, not even looking at me as he pulled the whore closer. Sam's right, babe. It's over between us. I'm leaving her, for you. The cruel finality of his words felt like a physical blow. My husband, the man I'd loved and supported for over 2 decades, was leaving me for this empty-headed bimbo? As if sensing my anguish, Caleb chose that moment to wander in, taking one look between us before siding with his father. Finally did the right thing, Dad. Mom's been a total nag for years. The shock and betrayal were overwhelming. Even my own son was against me, after everything I'd sacrificed to give him a good life. Amber snickered victoriously. Aw, what's the matter, Sammy? Gonna cry now that your family's abandoning your pathetic ass? That mocking jab was the final straw. Letting out a primal scream of fury, I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass ashtray, and whipped it straight at the little bitch's head. Amber barely had time to register the shock on her face before the ashtray struck her squarely, sending her crumpling to the floor in an unconscious heap. You crazy bitch! Dan rushed to her side as Caleb just watched with wide eyes. Glaring at the both of them with pure loathing, I hissed, Get that whore out of my house, and don't even think about coming back here yourselves. For once, Dan didn't argue. He simply gathered Amber's limp form and carried her out, Caleb reluctantly following behind. As the door slammed shut, I collapsed back into the chair, drained from the explosive confrontation. My body was shaking, my heart pounding in my ears. But through the haze of shock and anger, one thought rang out clearly. If it was war they wanted, it was war they'd get. I paced back and forth in Diane's office, my hands clenched into tight fists. I want to bleed him dry, you hear me? That lying, cheating scumbag doesn't deserve a penny after what he's done. My attorney watched me cautiously, like I was a wild animal that might lash out at any moment. I understand you're angry, Sam. Hell, I'd be furious too in your shoes. But we need to be strategic about this, okay? Letting out a shuddering breath, I collapsed into the chair across from her desk. You're right. I know, it's just, how could he do this to me, Diane? After everything? She leaned forward, her expression softening. Some men are just selfish pricks who think only with their dicks. Dan's one of the worst. And to take Caleb's side against his own mother? I shook my head in disbelief. I sacrificed so much for that ungrateful little brat. Which is exactly why we're going to make them pay. Diane's voice hardened as she slid a file across the desk. I had my investigators pull up everything they could find on Dan and his mistress, and let me tell you, it's not pretty. I opened the file, my eyes widening at the damning evidence inside. Bank statements, phone records, even a few incriminating photos of Dan and Amber in compromising positions. Looks like your husband has been stealing funds from his firm to bankroll his little fling, Diane stated grimly. Likely been going on for years if these records are accurate. My blood boiled at the thought of Dan using my own hard-earned money to fund his tawdry affair. The bastard. And as for Amber, Diane flipped through some more pages. Multiple counts of tax fraud, illegal drug use, you name it. This girl's dirtier than a mud puddle. A slow, wicked smile spread across my face as I looked up at her. So in other words, we've got them by the balls. Diane matched my grin. Exactly. We're going to use every last shred of this evidence to crucify them in court. Dan will be lucky if he's not thrown in prison. Good, I said with relish. Let's destroy them utterly. I want that cheating bastard left with nothing. No money, no career, no future. Consider it done. Diane immediately started scribbling notes. We'll bury them under an avalanche of lawsuits and criminal charges, hit them from every angle until they have no choice but to surrender. Leaning back in my chair, I felt a rush of vicious satisfaction. Dan and his whore had awoken a vengeful fury inside me. They were about to learn you don't screw over Samantha Henderson without paying dearly for it. Let the games begin, I stated coldly. Those two have no idea what kind of hell they've unleashed. I took a long drag from my cigarette, savoring the sweet taste of revenge as I watched the chaos unfold across the street. 2 police cruisers were parked outside Dan's accounting firm, their lights flashing as a pair of officers led a handcuffed Amber out the front doors. The little tramp's usual arrogant smirk was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a look of utter shock and panic. But I didn't do anything. She protested, straining against the cuffs. This is just a big misunderstanding. The cop merely grunted as he shoved her into the back of the squad car. Save it for the judge, sweetheart. We've got enough evidence to put you away for a long time. I couldn't resist letting out a derisive chuckle at her desperate pleas. Just a few days ago, she'd been living it up on my husband's dime. Now she was getting a first-class ticket to prison, thanks to the mountain of evidence Diane had gathered. Stubbing out my cigarette, I turned my gaze to the firm's entrance, where Dan was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair agitatedly. A few of his coworkers kept shooting him wary looks as they shuffled past. Right on cue, 2 men in crisp suits emerged. Federal agents, by the look of them. They approached Dan and started questioning him intently. From my vantage point, I could see his face rapidly draining of color as the reality set in. At one point, Dan's eyes went wide with panic, and he started shouting, gesturing wildly. The 2 agents simply shook their heads, one of them pulling out a pair of handcuffs. I felt a rush of dark glee as the cuffs clicked around Dan's wrists. The arrogant, cheating bastard finally brought to heel, led away in disgrace like a common criminal. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Just got word. Dan's been arrested for embezzlement, fraud, the works, and Amber's going down for tax evasion, drug possession, you name it. We've got them nailed. A savage grin spread across my face as I rapidly typed back. Perfect. Throw away the key and let them rot, the miserable scumbags. I watched with immense satisfaction as the disgraced pair were shoved into separate squad cars and hauled away, no doubt headed straight for an overcrowded holding cell. Popping another cigarette between my lips, I lit it slowly, reveling in the sweet taste of victory. Dan's cushy life was imploding all around him, his job, his money, his future. And it was all thanks to the deliciously incriminating evidence I'd provided the authorities through an anonymous tip. That cheating prick thought he could discard me like trash? Well, he was the one getting tossed in the gutter now, and his precious mistress right along with him. As the cruisers roared off into the distance, I took a long drag and exhaled, feeling utterly vindicated as the acrid smoke swirled around me. They deserved far worse than prison for their betrayal. But for now, this would do nicely. This is a complete farce. Dan slammed his fist on the table, his face beet red. You can't seriously be entertaining these outrageous demands from my wife? I simply stared back at him impassively, letting his impotent rage wash over me. Beside me, Diane calmly flipped through her notes. I'm afraid the evidence speaks for itself, Mr. Henderson, she stated coolly. The assets you embezzled, the bank accounts you tried to hide, not to mention your mistress's criminal activities. She shook her head. You're in no position to make demands. Dan opened his mouth to protest again, but the sharkish divorce lawyer beside him placed a restraining hand on his arm. The smug shark in a suit turned to us with an oily smile. Now let's not get too hasty here. Surely we can come to a reasonable settlement that avoids any further unpleasantness. I couldn't resist letting out a mocking laugh. Unpleasantness? You mean like when my husband abandoned me for a cheap whore half his age? Or when he drained our life savings to fund his tawdry affair? Leaning forward, I fixed Dan with a look of pure loathing. No, you arrogant prick. The only way this ends is with you giving me everything. The house, the assets, all of it. You can't be serious, Dan sputtered, his eyes bulging. After everything I sacrificed to build that wealth for our family? Our family? I shook my head in disgust. You threw away our family the second you stuck your wrinkly old dick in that silicone-stuffed bimbo. Diane placed a calming hand on my arm, her voice soothing. What my client is trying to say is that you've left us no choice but to pursue the most aggressive settlement possible. If you'd been smarter about covering your tracks, maybe we could have negotiated. The smug lawyer's bravado was slipping as he shuffled through his papers uncertainly. I could smell his fear, and it smelled delicious. But with the evidence we have of your fraud, embezzlement, and criminal misconduct. Diane shrugged. Well, let's just say that prison is a very real possibility if this goes to trial. One you can't afford. You bitch! Dan exploded, face purpling with rage as he struggled against his lawyer's restraints. You're ruining me, both of you money-grubbing whores. I simply watched in stony silence as the overweight security guard had to come physically restrain Dan, dragging him kicking and screaming from the room like a misbehaving child. Once he was gone, I turned to Diane with a wicked grin. I do love it when the trash takes itself out, she chuckled darkly. That it does. And with this Neanderthal out of the way, we can get down to finalizing this obscenely one-sided settlement. Leaning back in my chair, I lit a fresh cigarette, feeling euphoric as the smoke curled around me. After weeks of vicious legal combat, victory was finally in sight. Oh, don't worry, I stated with savage satisfaction. Dan's going to give me everything I want, and then some. No one betrayed me like he did and got away with it. The cheating bastard was going to pay for the rest of his miserable life. I took a long drag from my cigarette, surveying my new domain with immense satisfaction. The palatial house, the luxury cars in the driveway, the meticulously manicured lawn, all of it was finally, rightfully, mine. And it was all thanks to that deliciously one-sided divorce settlement Diane had brokered. Dan had been forced to sign over every asset, every investment, even the vintage Corvette he loved more than life itself. While that arrogant prick was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and a few thousand in legal fees, I was living in the lap of luxury. Funny how the tables turn, isn't it? The shrill ring of my phone broke the contented silence. Glancing at the caller ID, I smirked before answering. Why, hello, Danny boy. Miss me already? There was an audible snarl on the other end. You money-hungry bitch. I can't believe you took everything from me like this. Ah, what's the matter? I crooned mockingly. Don't like getting a taste of your own medicine for once? Maybe you should have thought about that before you cheated on your wife with a two-bit whore. She's in jail because of you, he raged. You framed Amber and got her locked up on bogus charges. Chuckling, I took another long drag. Well, when the evidence is staring you right in the face, tax evasion, drug possession, illegal bank accounts, she did that all to herself, you idiot. There was a heavy pause before Dan's defeated voice came through the line. Why are you doing this to me, Sam? After everything we built together? For a moment, I almost felt a pang of sadness for the broken man he'd become. Almost. You brought this on yourself the second you decided to throw away our marriage for a fling with some cheap gold digger, I stated coldly. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? You've destroyed me utterly, he whispered, sounding utterly desolate. I've got nothing left. Good, I shot back with vicious satisfaction. That's exactly what you deserve, you selfish prick. Maybe next time you'll appreciate what you had before you tossed it away like garbage. Before he could respond, I abruptly hung up and stubbed out my cigarette decisively. Screw him and his pathetic attempts to appeal to my non-existent guilt. He made his bed, now he could lie in it. Wandering back into the lavish living room, I poured myself a glass of expensive scotch and settled into the plush leather couch. As I savored the first sip, the front door opened and a familiar face stepped inside. There's my sexy sugar mama, Marco purred with a roguish grin, his muscular form sending my pulse racing. At 25 years old, he was barely older than a child, but something about his raw primal masculinity drove me wild. Crossing over to the couch, he pulled me into a deep, smoldering kiss. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless. You're insatiable, you know that? I murmured against his lips. Marco simply chuckled, already working on unbuttoning my blouse. Maybe, but you love it, don't you? His mouth found my neck, trailing scorching kisses along my skin as I arched against him with a soft moan. In this moment, with my young virile lover devouring me, I felt powerful, invincible. Dan and his whore could rot for all I cared. After the hell they'd put me through, I deserved this. The house, the money, everything. Most of all, I deserved to finally be happy again, without a cheating snake like Dan dragging me down. Tangling my fingers in Marco's hair, I pulled him closer, surrendering to the delicious heat coursing through me. This was my reward, and I was going to enjoy it immensely.